Good afternoon, everybody. Um, this video is a redo of a video I tried to post yesterday. So if you see a link in a forum to a video with a similar title from the same person, understand this is not a repost. For whatever reason, the audio in that video, checking my microphone to make sure again, did not work. So that video had no audio, and I believe this video is important, so I'm remaking it. And if you're watching this video, please watch to the end to get the full context of what I am going to say. If you disagree with me, if you're from either side of the spectrum, that's fine. Leave your comments below, but please watch to the end. Don't just pick one little thing I say that you may be taking out of context. This video is going to be about why myself, as a progressive Democrat, supports, legal, responsible concealed carry. And also it's going to go in depth about what I believe, reasonable gun control is and how legal, responsible concealed carry is a positive thing. However, there are elements to gun ownership that I view as non-practical that do more harm than good, and where a compromise on this heavily debated issue that many people are passionate on both sides about can come to, because there's many different types of people with many different beliefs in this nation and all nations, and nobody is ever going to get 100% their way. There must be some compromise and pragmatism. Even I know that, and I'm an INFJ, and we're known to be idealistic. So I want to say first off, before I get into, the meat of this video, that owning firearms in the United States is a right if you meet the criteria for it. However, it is a responsibility. That being said, this video is my opinion. If one does own firearms or is considering firearm ownership, first and foremost, ensure that you can legally own a firearm and that you purchase the firearm you're looking to purchase legally, and that you abide all local, state, and federal laws when it comes to firearm ownership. Additionally, I would suggest that you receive the proper safety training to ensure that you not only are competent in handling that gun, but you know all the safety procedures of handling a gun, cleaning a gun, carrying a gun, etc. Additionally, if you are seeking to conceal a concealed carry permit, you must go through all the legal channels in your area to do so. In most places, I believe in the United States, that is done through your county sheriff's office. If it is not, I'm sure you should contact them anyway. That would be a good place to start. They can either help you begin the process to apply for your carry permit or point you in the right direction to whatever governing body is in charge of issuing concealed carry permits where you live. So, now that I've said that, we're going to get into this. Guns are part of American culture, good or bad. They've always have been. We have an amendment in the Constitution, the Second Amendment, in regards to gun ownership that is heavily debated, and it's debated for many reasons. I'm briefly going to touch on that, but keep in mind, this video is not a Second Amendment argument for or against. This video is not a constitutional argument. It is an argument of practicality and what is practical and what isn't, what does have a positive benefit and what has more of a negative benefit in terms of the various types of gun ownership. And I'm going to be giving arguments from both sides of the aisle because, while I am a progressive Democrat, a former Bernie Sanders supporter who ideally I would want Nina Turner to run in 2024, and a demand side capitalist. If you don't know what that is, think like the capitalism we had during like Eisenhower and JFK. But that being said, I'm a centrist when it comes to gun ownership. So I'm putting it out there. This isn't about me, but I want people to know where I lie in the political spectrum as a whole and where I lie on the issues of gun ownership. So, yes, the Second Amendment, the words shall not be infringed are within the Second Amendment. The words well regulated are also within the Second Amendment. So there's some debate there even among the Second Amendment and about rights not being infringed. Well, in a lot of, I will say this, in a lot of states, it is legal for even a felon to own what is classified as antique firearms, and roughly speaking, that's firearms produced before 1899. In other words, firearms like muzzle loaders, cap and ball revolvers, black powder weapons, weapons that certainly were the type flintlocks that were the type of weapons that existed during the era of the founding fathers and the Constitution. So one could argue that those rights are not being infringed because they can own the types of weapons that the founding fathers were speaking about, because obviously those men couldn't foresee all the advancements in firearm technology. Something like an AR-15 that holds 50 or more rounds was obviously didn't exist and was completely unheard of in that era. However, as I said, guns are part of American culture, gun ownership as a whole, and that will never change. So what is a reasonable compromise into what is practical gun ownership that is a benefit, and what is, mostly been a negative to a lot of Americans? One quick, before I get into my opinions, I'm going to talk about gun ownership. This is going to focus on handguns for home defense and concealed carry, and mainly for people that live in urban or suburban areas. I understand you have more wildlife threats, perhaps if you live deep in the woods, out in very sparse areas. I understand that. I'm not discrediting your additional needs to handle that potential threat, but I'm not speaking from that perspective. In other words, like where a 38 would be perfectly adequate in a suburban environment to defend one's home against home invaders, someone out in the deep woods out west might need a 44 or a 45-70 lever gun if they are having issues with brown bears, for example. So I just wanted to briefly mention that. So, as I said, I am a progressive and a gun owner, and I am actually a fan of revolvers, particularly Smith and Wesson, and a little bit of Colt too. But I own two revolvers that are practical for my purposes of concealed carry. I have a concealed carry permit and home defense. Actually, for the longest time, I only had this. It's a Smith and Wesson Model 36. It's cleared. And this was, pretty much from the 50s through the early 90s, standard issue for detectives and other plainclothes officers. So it's a very reliable, heavily used, very easy to find gun with a lot of history. Plainclothes officers carried them, uniform officers carried them as backup guns and or as off-duty weapons as well. Modern variants of this are still used as backup guns in law enforcement today. I'll get a little bit later about why revolvers are, in my opinion, the better choice for the person who isn't really a firearms enthusiast but wants that just-in-case gun. And the other gun I own is actually a gun I inherited. It was my father's. It was his, just-in-case gun, and it's a Smith and Wesson Model 10. This was actually a police trade-in. It's also clear. This was standard issue for uniformed police from the 50s through the early 90s. This, I believe, perhaps maybe until recently, was the most produced handgun of all times. This was essentially Glock before Glock. This is the police equivalent of, I'm an ex-firefighter, of the firefighters' hip boots and long coats. Very reliable, very easy to learn on, very accurate. So if you are a beginner to firearms and you're looking for that just-in-case gun, particularly for home defense, if you don't plan to carry it just to have in your home, a police trade-in Model 10 is an excellent example of something that won't let you down. It'll get the job done. They're easy to find, and they're easy to find quite cheaply. So, why do I support concealed carry as a progressive? Well, largely in part because it can help people who are victimized, particularly at a higher rate defend themselves against, becoming a victim of a crime simply for being who they are. And this is true for many different communities, and forgive me if I leave your specific community out. I'm just giving examples that come to my head. Women, for example, are victimized more than men because a lot of times they're seen as easier targets because they're smaller in stature and easier for, most men to overpower. And also, keeping in mind the algorithm, women are attacked for other reasons than robbery in ways that men typically aren't, in a completely vile and unforgivable way, committing a crime that, in my mind, is unforgivable ever, and one should have to carry that stigma for the rest of their days, rightfully so. I think you all know what I'm talking about. Also, people of different communities are targeted simply for being members of that community. Yes, there is racism in the United States, and people of certain races are often victimized just for, peacefully entering a neighborhood that others deem that they have no right to be in. And this can be true of many different minority groups. Unfortunately, also people of, with disabilities, people in wheelchairs are seen as easy victims for robbery and other crimes because given their disability, it would be logical for that attacker to assume that they can't defend themselves as well as somebody able-bodied. And in the same way, too, smaller men are seen as, easier targets because typically, not accounting for perhaps that person has extensive boxing or martial arts training, a 6'5" man, for example, is going to more easily victimize the average 5'8" male than he would, say, a man who's comparable to his size at 6'5". Yes, there's other factors that play in, but for the sake of this video, I have to make generalities to get my point across. Also, people of different religious groups are victimized simply for, you know, outwardly appearing to be a part of that religion, or it could be because they're a woman and a member of that religion. I myself, I'm a male witch, and I have heard many horror stories from my sisters of the craft about them being attacked and victimized, one for being a woman, but also for being in what is considered to be, dressing as a witch, like putting it out there that, they are a practitioner of the craft, which they have every right to do, and they're not bothering anybody. And no one should be victimized simply for being a member of any specific group. But sadly, that is the world we live in, where minorities and women are victimized at a higher rate than men in most crimes. So having a legal concealed carry weapon can help these people that are more susceptible to being victims of violent crimes defend themselves. The average 5'2" woman who, let's assume, has no martial arts training, it is very unlikely she'll be able to fight off, say, a man my size. I'm 6 foot, 170 pounds. But if she legally is carrying a weapon like this, which is a common concealed carry weapon, a Smith & Wesson J-frame, then, she can realistically defend herself against that attacker. Same goes for, the person in a wheelchair who's being robbed. Now, it is appalling to me that, women and different minority groups and people of disabilities are constantly in fear, particularly at night, particularly if they're alone, going out about their business, doing what they want, which they have the freedom to do so. It's appalling that they have to be in constant fear about being attacked. But sadly, that is the world we live in. And at least with legal and responsible concealed carry, they can have the peace of mind of at least knowing that they have something on them that they can defend themselves and stop that attacker. Like something like this, it's gonna, 5 shots of 38 special is going to stop a man my size. It's going to stop a 6'5", roided out guy. It's going to stop just about any person, assuming you land your shots, of course. That to me is more than reasonable for gun ownership. That to me is empowering. That to me is giving people the right to defend themselves against victimization in a situation where they are most likely, without that gun, would be physically overpowered by their attacker, because attackers look for easy victims. You know, these are criminals. It's like the predator who goes after the animal that's limping. They want to put in the littlest effort to get what they want. In home defense, the same thing. Yes, I fully believe that someone should be able to legally own a firearm to defend themselves, their property, and their family against, someone illegally entering that property with the intent to commit a criminal act. Now, in my opinion, something like this is perfectly adequate for home defense against, other human beings who wish to commit a crime against you in your home. I do not see the need or understand the argument of why someone would need what is commonly referred to as assault weapons, although I know a lot of people don't like that term, so I'm going to use military style weapons. I do not see the practical need for civilian ownership of military style firearms. Yet I'm with you. You have every right to have a gun, but I've yet to hear a cohesive argument about why something like this, or its equivalent in a semi-automatic like a Beretta or a Glock or a Sig, what have you, is an adequate defense for home defense. Why, not why you need a gun. Why do you need that much firepower? And it's completely unrealistic, some of the things I've heard. Like, I hope no one's ever burglarized or, have to face somebody intending to do them harm in their home through home invasion with intent to commit other crimes. But it is very, very, very unlikely you're going to be in a scenario where it's essentially Tony Montana's last stand and you're going to go up against an army. Even on channels such as the Yankee Marshal, who's a great channel if you want to learn more about guns, particularly revolvers. He's very entertaining and very knowledgeable. It's a channel I recommend to watch. Even he said, there's no practicality in that. He is a pretty outspoken libertarian gun enthusiast. His home defense gun is whatever handgun he is using as his concealed carry weapon at that time. He rotates them. Even he said a military style rifle such as an AR-15 is not going to deter someone from committing a crime against you. Usually those that claim they need that much firepower are involved in illegal activity, often involving elements of organized crime. And in that situation, it doesn't matter how much firepower you have. In that situation, if you're involved in situations like that and someone is coming for you, they know what you have and they're going to come prepared to acid reflux, to deal with you in that situation. I see ownership of those types of weapons as more harm than good, because part of gun ownership is being responsible not only when you carry that gun, but where it is when you are not, and who can potentially have access to it. You must take on responsibility for the firearms that you choose to own. Yes, it is your right, but if you choose to exercise that right, you are now taking on an additional responsibility. So, given, the amount of mass shootings that take place and what can happen when a military style weapon can be obtained relatively easily from someone who intends to do others harm, and the amount of firepower that packs and the amount of rounds that pack without, without needing a reload, is catastrophic. And very few people, who are responsible gun owners want to lug around a weapon such as that for daily carry. It is not practical. something like this is, and I encourage people who are eligible to legally and responsibly do so carry, something akin to this because it's easily concealable in your pocket, on a holster, inside the waistband, small of your back, in a purse, what have you. There's so many ways to conceal a weapon like that. And it can potentially be more of a good than a harm because if somebody were even to get a hold of this, it has 5 rounds and it's a revolver. They're not known for their reload speed, even with speed loaders, particularly someone who's not familiar with firearms. And I will point out, too, that even conservative hero and arguably demigod Ronald Reagan supported the Brady bill. I don't see any practical purpose in owning weapons of that style. However, I do fully support legal and responsible concealed carry. And I'll say this for those of you on the right that are now mad at me. I think the Brady bill should come back. Go on, keep watching. But, however, when it comes to legal concealed carry, I think that should be at the federal level. I know, but hear me out. States' rights people, this may be one of the few times where you're like, yeah, the federal government would be better at that. I think if you legally obtain a concealed carry permit, in my opinion, you should have to prove that you are competent with that weapon. There should be 2 categories, semi-automatic and revolver. And there should be a test, not as rigorous as a, police certification to be certified or recertified their weapon, but a basic competency test that shows you are competent with that gun and you can safely handle it. Then be issued a card that is, good for life. You don't have to go through that test again. It can be revoked for criminal activity and things of that nature. There should also be a psychological test before you get that. Yes, I do agree with that because you know what? Police officers have to go through a very rigorous psychological background check before they enter the police academy. I went through the exact same test. I was never in law enforcement, but I was in the profession. I was a professional firefighter, and at least in my agency where I worked in Arlington, Virginia, the psychological testing for a firefighter and a police officer were the same test. So, yes, once you pass your psychological background check and you prove you're competent with your weapon of choice, you can qualify with either a revolver or a semi-automatic or both. You can then carry any revolver or semi-automatic that you legally own. And well, you're waiting for the positives, right? Well, the positives is, in my opinion, you should be able to carry that across state lines because, in addition, one of the other things that is a factor in concealed carry is certain professions, given the nature of that profession, either like people carrying cash in that profession, things of value, certain types of drugs that have a high street value, that also causes a higher rate of victimization amongst those individuals. And those individuals often conduct business across state lines and should be able to conceal carry and protect themselves because they are at a higher rate of victimization due to that profession. They should be able to carry that weapon that they legally own or legally psychologically cleared to carry and shown that they are competent with across state lines, in my opinion. So yes, this is a heavily, heavily debated topic with very passionate voices on both sides. I like to believe that I come across with a reasonable compromise, even if you disagree with me. Am I truly so unreasonable as that you couldn't sit down and have a conversation with my views? And yes, more people legally and responsibly concealed carrying, I think it quite possibly could cut down on various types of crime. However, and one thing I want to mention before I end this is if you are considering a just-in-case gun, if you are not a firearm enthusiast, I highly recommend a revolver over a semi-automatic. There's no slide to rack. Uh, Limp wristing isn't a factor. No stove piping. If you do get a bad round, you have multiple chambers. You pull again, and it'll cycle and most likely fire. The springs and magazines aren't there to go bad. Ammunition issues where certain ammo, it's ammo sensitive and it won't feed. Semi-automatics are fine if that's what you prefer. If you're a firearms enthusiast, that's your preference. I'm not telling you different. I'm just saying they require disassembly and more maintenance typically than revolvers. So for the person who rarely gets to the range, wants that just in case gun, even something as reliable as a Glock, if you sit a Glock in a nightstand responsibly and locked up for 5 years, chances are the springs in that magazine are going to be bad and that you're not going to be able to fire all the rounds in that magazine. You sit this loaded responsibly locked up in a nightstand for 5 years, it'll still fire. So for those of you that are considering gun ownership and see all like the tactical movement that exists today, don't think that something like this isn't practical and enough for your purposes, particularly if you're just looking for a just in case gun. In fact, it is, in my opinion, your best option. If you're into the whole tactical thing, go ahead. That's you do you. But I'm saying that's not for the person who wants the just in case gun. That's for the firearms enthusiast, in my opinion. So I hope this video was informative and I was able to explain cohesively why I believe what I believe, why I believe that there is no practical, we're not talking about rights, there is no practical reason for civilian ownership of military style weapons such as AR-15s, AK-47s, M4s, etc. But why I do support legal and responsible concealed carry and how I believe that that can be a deterrent to stop crime and empowering specifically for groups of people who are victimized at a higher rate just for being among that group of people, such as women, such as people that are transgender, people of color, people of certain religions, etc. So thank you if you made it to the end, and please leave any comments below. I'll end with this. I think one thing that we can all or should be able to all agree on politically is politics is supposed to be a debate. So regardless of what your views are on any given topic, you should be able to explain what your views are and why you hold those views. And I respect people that disagree with me. What I don't like, and I think a lot of people are turned off by it, is platitudes. Huh? Left, right. I think we can agree on that. Like, platitudes are meaningless. Platitudes are usually, spewed by people who want power for power's sake, and also entitlement because they mean nothing. You don't know what they believe. They're just like, fall in line behind me because tribalism. No. So yes, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. Remember, if you are considering gun ownership, to follow all local, state, and federal laws in your location before trying to obtain a firearm, and to follow the proper channels in your area to legally obtain a concealed carry permit. Again, I hope this was informative. Leave your comments below. I think this is something that we all need to come to the table on and decide and debate what is a reasonable compromise.